Hey guys, welcome back to Sports with Mono and Mono. I'm Jim, and as you can see, that is not Steve on my
Not
right.
Steve.
That's Rob, our producer. Steve is having some, I think, technical difficulties. Hopefully, maybe he could join us later. But right now, we wanted to get the show up and running. So again, thanks for joining us. It's July 30th, 2022. Rob, I mean,
First football games next week, right?
right. So training camp, high school football, all those kind of things that's coming up. So thanks for joining us and welcome back. And Rob, before I do my the monologue this week, I just wanted to kind of give a shout out. There's a couple of tragic events keeps going on, right? These fires in California and the flooding in Lexington, Kentucky, which is where my sister lives. So thankfully they're safe. But and the heat wave that's taken over the country, it's just been a one of those how much more can people take kind of situation. But I wanted to give from a sports with mono and mono perspective or humanitarian thoughts and prayers to you guys. So it's just with all these fires that have been going on in California over the past few years. I mean, it's like almost the whole state seems like it's in flames. It's horrible, horrible. But anyway, so all our best to you guys.
And I was going to say that we don't have the perspective living in a small state like Jersey, how massive California actually is.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And it's hard to think that some of those fires will probably burn half of North Jersey down if they were here.
It almost seems that way, but it's just a horrifying situation out there. And I give credit to the firefighters who are trying to do their best to contain it. Anyway, so our monologue is sponsored by Coriano Trucking, our loyal supporter since the start of the show. And Rob, my monologue this week, it was a documentary I happened to see, and it was on Netflix. It was about Marty Fish. Now, I don't know if you know who Marty Fish is, but I certainly know that Mike Garvey, who's a big tennis guy, knows who Marty Fish is.
I think
he was just a really great player at a time. He grew up best friends with Andy Roddick. And he happened to become number one in the U.S. at a time where the latest big three, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic came on the scene. But it dealt with, it was a very courageous special for him to come forward with this, especially, in today's day and age with, some mental illness, whatever you can term it. I don't even know the medical diagnosis. But sometimes we take for granted by watching, the best at what they are, in sports, whether it be the Yankees or Tom Brady, but people, deal with these kind of issues. And you know what? I just couldn't begin to give you Marty Fish all the credit in the world for coming out. I mean, it actually got so bad a situation, whether it was pressure, whatever, but nobody can understand it. I don't know how anyone can figure out the brain, but it forced them to miss a semifinals matchup with Roger Federer at the U.S. Open. And, but talking about Marty Fish and the perseverance that he had, I'd love to have him on our show someday and let him talk about this and the experience that he had, because it's fascinating. And he rebounded, and now he's he's an absolute almost professional golfer. He actually played in the 3M tournament last week on a player's exemption. And he's one of the best players on that American Celebrity Tour. So he has rebounded, and I think he did a world of good for a lot of people. And we can never understand, the situation of being on that grand of a stage. Some people get through it, some people don't. And, when you get a guy like Marty Fish to come right out and say, this has happened, I can't begin to tell you how many millions of people said, you know what? I can absolutely relate to what he's thinking, kind of thing. So great documentary. It's worth watching. And, Mike Garvey gave me that recommendation and I watched it. And like I said, I think we've all gone through those kind of things, but this was really, really an excellent documentary and something to watch. And kudos to Marty Fish.
Speaking of documentaries, have you watched that Jeter one at all?
Yeah, it's outstanding, by the way. I mean, whether you're a Yankee fan or not, this is really. I'm only through first 2 episodes. I didn't see 3 and 4 yet, but if they're as good as 1 and 2, it's really worth watching. This kid is as good as advertised, and
Well,
there's so much footage that we still haven't seen. This is 7 parts, Rob, and I'm only 2 deep, and it's great.
I've only watched the first one so far, and it got very emotional for me because I was at those games in the 95 ALDS.
Yeah.
And to think that my dad and my brother, who are not here with us anymore, were there, and Don Mattingly being my favorite player of all time, and
he was one of our favorites too. Yeah.
And watching him do his thing, finally in the playoffs. And then, of course, before that, the whole heartbreak we had in '94 when we had the team. I think it was us and Montreal, right? Were the 2 best teams in baseball.
Yeah.
And it would have been a hell of a, international World Series, but.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to bring that up in my random points about, and we always give credit to this ESPN for these documentaries because they're outstanding. And this is no exception. And you know what? Some people see him as arrogant, or some people see him as confident. But you know what? His results on that field, he was clutch all the time. In a Thurman Munson role, when you want to talk about you needed a hit, and Thurman Munson was up, you were getting a hit. And that's how Derek Jeter is. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and ironically, my cousin's wife is related to his mother's side of the family.
Right? Yeah.
But they're all Met fans, so they never really met anything, they're all Met fans. But yeah, she has a relation with the mom's side, and
that's cool.
Yeah.
So Rob, I want to stick with baseball because there's some really, really cool things happening in New York. I mean, we keep talking about this guy Judge, and we know his contract's coming up. He's doing nothing to become nothing wrong to be the next $40 million a year player. He's just having a monster year. And monster year in New York Yankees history is big. I mean, he's hit more home runs after 100 games than Babe Ruth did. I mean, we could go on and on. He's just tearing it up. And I wanted to bring up, of course, the Subway Series, right? The Yanks lost 2 to the Mets. But we got a chance to see Max Scherzer, who's, going down as one of the greatest of all time. This guy, Pete Alonso, is just having a monster year, too. He's really coming to his own. But you can't deny what Judge, he hit 2 home runs and a grand slam last night and you could sense when this is happening. I was watching the game against the Royals on the other night, right? It was probably Wednesday or Thursday. 0-0 game. This guy comes up and you can almost sense that he was going to hit a home run and walk it off. And that's exactly what he did. So the numbers from a Yankees lore perspective are just amazing. But you know what? We got Pete Alonso, who's making a big name for himself as potential MVP candidate. How great would that be to have a Met and a Yankee win
the same city?
And I'm not a Met fan, but I admire good baseball. And every time I get to see Max Scherzer pitch, that's a treat. I mean, I love it.
I'll tell you though, this is why I'm not a betting man. I know too much, first of all, and it actually works against me. Because if I was a betting man, I would have bet the house that Domingo Germán would have gotten his butt whipped by the Mets, and he didn't. He held his own for 5 innings.
Yeah,
but my mind had Yankees, Scherzer, Germán after his disastrous start last week. This is gonna be a blowout, and it really wasn't. It really wasn't. That's why I don't bet, because I overthink things like that, and I would have lost.
I know. Well, listen. I mean, any talk of anybody but Judge becoming the MVP is. I mean, I know Ohtani's having a good year, but he gets the losses when he strikes out 10. He struck out 10 5 games in a row. He's a great player, but this year this guy Judge is having is just.
He has one thing against him.
What?
Age.
I know. He's
31 already. Yeah.
Is 30 old now? I mean, is it old?
But you know what? It's the age-old adage. How many of these players, these power hitters, last past? I mean, Pujols might be a good example. You know, he's not the threat he was, but he's still popping in his 40s. So maybe he has that trajectory, stay healthy and stuff. But we'll see.
Well, that was a good producer handoff there, because I wanted to bring up Albert Pujols. He's still hanging on. He's closing in on 700 home runs, and we've talked about this. The first 10 years, if you look at Albert Pujols' numbers, they're, and I dare say this, Lou Gehrig-like. But I'm a big fan of his, but he's been hanging on for the past 4 years. Yes, he's still going to hit you 10, 12 home runs, I guess. And I don't have a problem with him getting to 700, because, he's got a Hall of Fame career regardless of whether he gets there or not. But we talked about compiling numbers for a little bit longer than the career, and this should be his farewell tour, but it may not be. If somebody's willing to pay him to hit 12 home runs next year, they'll get there. But I like him. But Rob, I just wanted to mention that this guy Judge is just tearing it up. And he didn't look good against Max Scherzer. I get that, and that's what
the whole series. He didn't look good the whole 2 games. Right? He had a home run in 1 game, right?
Yeah, he did
against the Mets. Yeah.
So listen, we couldn't do a baseball segment, right, without talking about Mike Trout. And now Mike Trout may have potentially a career-threatening injury. And I bring that up because, listen, I'm a huge Mike Trout fan. But obviously he's had a history of not being able to stay on the field. And when you look overall at his numbers, they're not even in the same league as Albert Pujols. Not even close. I mean, I think he's only driven in 100 runs, maybe 3 times. Pujols did it 11 years in a row, I think. I mean, but he's going to, right now he's considered, one of the best players in the game, but his career is in jeopardy.
Yeah, now, all right. Would this be very similar to Don Mattingly? Right? Does he have enough? Yes. Does he have enough years in the league to be considered,
well, he's got the time in. He's in his 12th year or something, believe it or not,
Wow.
Yeah. But I wanted to bring that up because I like him. He's good for the game, but it's just a shame. He's not able. But if you put numbers, Pujols numbers and Trout numbers, you're going to go, oh, my God. I mean, this guy Pujols' numbers were literally like Lou Gehrig.
Was he all right, I'm mistaken here. Does he have any blemishes as far as off the field?
No.
Was he the one? Again, I could be mistaken here. There was one Latin player who suddenly divorced his wife or something quickly, and
I don't know.
Is that somebody else? I remember a couple years ago it was a big story.
Trout. His record.
No, I meant Pujols. Pujols was he?
Oh, I don't know, but Trout is
No, Trout has one thing I don't like about Trout. He's the Eagles fan.
Well, that's from the area. That's all, And he's, what his passion is? Meteorology.
That's cool.
Right? He wants to be a weather guy when he retires, so he's going to have enough money in the bank to do it. But so listen, Rob, a couple other quick things, and last week when we talked about the All-Star game and how I said it was more of just of a showcase of guys. Luis Castillo for the Reds was pitching. And I actually watched him pitch against Max Scherzer a couple of weeks ago, and this kid's the real deal. He got dealt yesterday to the Seattle Mariners.
I know.
And why is that? Right, but why is that important? Because the Mariners have the longest tenure in all the major sports of a playoff drought. So they're trying to make a run for it. Listen, I don't know that they can with the Astros and the Yankees, but they're making a run for it. I would have liked to have seen Luis Castillo in pinstripes, but can we sign Judge? Can we get Soto and get Luis Castillo? I don't know. That's asking an awful lot from Santa Claus.
I guess that's his response to my question. But no, it could end up being a blessing in disguise because maybe Montes is not as injured with the history as Castillo, and they both are signed through next year. So maybe we give up less prospects. But I tell you though, it could have been happier than what we sent for Benintendi. You got one maybe mid-rotation guy, maybe 19th in our farm system.
Yeah, we didn't give up much.
No, we didn't give up much. And, we'll see if the guy wants to stay past this year. But at least he's going to help us this year.
Right. And we just got a comment from somebody saying, this is crazy to believe it or not. I don't know what's going on in baseball to see these teams unload. Like the Nationals unloaded, everybody, right, in the past couple of years after winning a World Series, right? So, what does that say to the fans? We're going to suck for the next 5 years. So they get rid of Scherzer, Trey Turner for nothing. Now Soto's going to probably be dealt by the weekend. And one of our comments we just got online here, Rob, was Shohei Ohtani is on the trading block. So, I mean, you're talking about two of the best players coming up in the game. And the Angels are basically saying, we're done. We can't afford this guy. Trout's career may be over, so we got to rebuild. And the Anaheim Angels have been rebuilding for 12 years.
Speaking of Angels, would you? I know Noah Syndergaard is on the list of potential gets for us. What do you think?
No.
Too late.
Too late. He burned himself out with the Mets, and he's not the player he once was. That's for sure. I mean, that's for sure. I don't think you need. I don't. We got Severino to worry about whether he's going to be able to come back and with his history. But Syndergaard, now he's been through hell. He throws at 100 miles an hour. There's not a lot of tread on those tires. I wouldn't do that.
Well, it appears there was also a pitcher from Pittsburgh on the radar, Quintana, and I would love, especially since Michael King is now out for the year, to get David Robertson back for a third time.
You know what, though, Rob? I just saw him pitch. I forgot who he's playing for.
Cubs.
The Cubs. Yeah, that's not David Robertson either. We don't need that. We don't need that. He's not the player he once was. So anyway, so baseball is, like I said, we're at the 100 game mark of a 162 game season, and these are the dog days. This is where you got to step up and see who wants to win the World Series. We'll see.
And I'll tell you, being up here at Villaroma is pretty special when you have the Subway Series because you're literally split down the middle of Yankee fans and Met fans.
I could imagine, yeah.
So it's like a must-watch. Everybody's huddled around the TVs by the bars. Kids, grandfathers, dads, just watching every pitch. And it's pretty cool to see.
Right. You got a Met fan with a Met jersey sitting next to a Yankee fan with a Yankee jersey. You can imagine the barbs going back and forth all night.
So when they play again? So when is the reverse matchup in Yankee Stadium? I forget.
I don't know exactly when, but that's coming up at some point.
Good. It's fun to be up here and see that.
Yeah, it is. So, Rob, let's move on to football. And I wanted to bring this up first because – and again, all of these things with who gets into the Hall of Fame, who doesn't, my feelings, like how could Joe Klecko not be in the Hall of Fame and how could Dan Hampton be in the Hall of Fame doesn't make any sense. So they have these senior committees now. It's hard to believe. I mean, we're getting so old that we consider Joe Klecko a senior, right?
Wow.
But there were some names on that list. And Steve and I always tend to do this. We go, okay, Hall of Fame talk. Give us the name. The answer is yes or no, right? And I saw this thing. Joe Klecko is finally on this. So if there is any justice in sports, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. He knows how I feel about it. And when he finally gets in there, we got to have him on the show, Rob, Mm-hmm. But there were a couple other guys that I'm like, oh, my God, they're not in the Hall of Fame. Chuck Howley. He was the only only defensive player to win an MVP for a losing team in a Super Bowl. Great Cowboy. Steve would vouch for that. And
Charles Haley?
no, Chuck Howley.
Okay.
He was a linebacker back in the Tom Landry days in the early 70s with Roger Staubach. And another linebacker, which it escapes me how Randy Gradishaw used to play for the Denver Broncos back in the day with Tom Jackson and those guys. How could Randy Gradishaw not be in the Hall of Fame already? He's got to go in as a senior. I mean, unbelievable. Another one, Bob Kuechenberg, one of the greatest guards in the history of the National Football League on an undefeated Miami Dolphins team. He's not in the Hall of Fame. But Warren Sapp is, Howie Long is, and
is my buddy on there? Leonard Marshall?
No, Leonard Marsh is not getting in the Hall of Fame.
Think about it. He's got 80-something sacks.
Listen, Leonard Marshall was a very good football player for the Giants and pivotal in their Super Bowl time, but he's never going to get in the Hall of Fame. You got to put Kuechenberg, Howley. Here's another throwback name, and I don't know. I bet you don't know it, but my little brother Steve would. Tommy Nobis, former, I think he came out of Texas, and he had an unbelievable career for the Falcons, as much as you can have a great career with the Falcons. But he was a Hall of Famer for sure, and those guys have to get in. So that's my rant about the Hall of Fame. You know, take those other three guys, Hampton, Long, and take them out of the Hall of Fame until these guys get in. That's all. Anyway, so the couple other things, a lot of training camps open, right, this week. You're a Jets guy, right?
Steelers, Giants.
Steelers, Giants. Okay. Well, there was an interesting thing that my brother Thomas sent us this thing. This guy, Kadarius Toney. I don't know what is that?
Steelers.
All right. Well, I'm a big historical Pittsburgh Steelers fan. The Steel Curtain, that team was phenomenal. Just phenomenal.
I mean, real quick, if you're a Giant fan or vice versa, how can you not root? It's all the same family, pretty much.
They are.
Right?
The Rooneys and the Maros.
The same family.
Yeah. Like the Capulets and the Montagues.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, Jack Lambert was my favorite football player growing up, but from the Giants' perspective, this crazy thing yesterday, this guy, Kadarius Toney, who basically hasn't done anything in the National Football League. Now he has a rap alias or something, and they showed up playing his rap music at training camp. And immediately my brother texted me and said, can you believe this is going on? Is Brian Dable going to let this kind of stuff happen and distract from the mission at large, which is trying to win football games for the New York Giant fan? I hope not. But I would figure I don't have a problem with them playing his rap song or introducing him by whatever his mantra is. But you got to do something in this league first, don't you? That's what I always used to think. It's crazy. And how about this? Crazier yet still. Kyler Murray gets this.
Oh my God!
Ridiculous contract. Whatever.
He was literally a baby all off season. He was a little spoiled brat all off season, and they stay. But they got their digging though with that little study clause.
I'm going to talk about that because that's the reason. The money aside, right? He's basically proven himself to be a malcontent, not a team player, and they throw this clause in. And I said the clause. I looked at it. I go, wait a minute. Shouldn't a starting quarterback making $200 and some odd million a year want to watch films to help his team? And they all took this backlash. You know what they did? They removed that clause from the contract. That really happened. Do you have to ask your quarterback to watch game films? You know how many hours Tom Brady watches game films? Right? 24 hours a day, for God's sakes. It really is. a sign of the times. And the craziness that's going on in the NFL right now, it's almost unbelievable. It's almost turning me off to the game. That you know, just play football. Like, I guess the rules have changed, but to ask your quarterback to watch game films is ridiculous. Sorry.
I think a slap in the face to all these quarterbacks who are on the cusp and trying their hardest to make it and do whatever it takes. And this guy just like went off script and did the exact opposite.
Right.
Hard to root for. That guy.
Right. So when there's nothing else to talk about, they all talk about whether, Bill Belichick is losing his mind at some point because he didn't name an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator. But make no mistake about Bill Belichick. He is ready, willing, and fully able to get a team back to its competitive state, whether he has a coordinator or not.
Yep.
I don't understand his affection for this guy, Joe Judge, who I wouldn't hire Joe Judge at St. Joe's for special teams. But he seems to like him for some reason. But any question about, has Belichick lost it? No, Bill Belichick hasn't lost it. He knows exactly what he's doing. And, somehow he's going to get it through, whether the guy has a title or not.
Same way, all these quote unquote cheating allegations against him through the years. I think he's a smart ass guy who found a loophole, right?
Absolutely.
That's what I think.
Absolutely. And listen, Tom Brady doesn't win 7 without Belichick, and Belichick doesn't win 7 without Tom Brady. I think you could say that without hesitation. I'm sorry, but it's just crazy when I see stuff like that. But listen, the Cleveland Browns made another very impactful signing this week. In the event that their $200 million quarterback gets suspended, which he will, they signed Josh Rosen. So they got everything going. I mean, are they not looking out for their fan base, signing Josh Allen to fill the void when Jacoby Brissett gets hurt? It's unbelievable, this league. My little brother is better than Josh Rosen today, and he hasn't played quarterback in 35 years.
I'm surprised they even had that. I'm surprised the NFL allowed that contract to even be signed with him. Though he makes $1 million this year because they know he's gonna get suspended. That just speaks volumes on that freaking owner. What a jerk he is.
Rob, this is the circus the NFL has become. It doesn't matter whether you have a contract or not. I mean, DK Metcalf says, I'm not playing unless you give me a contract. Boom. So they held the gun to the Seahawks head and gave him $20 million a year.
24. I sense the urgency a bit more in the NFL because one hit, one bad step on turf, and your career is done. Unlike basketball, and those contacts are not guaranteed. But use that same point of view for NBA, and it's ludicrous because those guys are guaranteed contracts, and we'll get to it. But KD asking for a trade is
right.
4 years on a contract is nuts. An NFL guy is one hit away from a lot of stuff,
and that's the game.
Paralysis, retirement, permanent injury.
CTE. We understand that. I do understand it, but having that's different from having a contract. That you decide I don't want to play because you're paying somebody else more money than me. You signed the contract. I can't say this enough. I hate to dwell on it, but I do. But listen, one other note. Danny Amendola retired. And I got to give that kid some credit, man. He was a spunky little right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the Bill Belichick mold of wide receiver. And just like Julian Edelman, and he had great career, won 2 rings, and I was surprised he played 13 years in the league.
Wow.
Right? Obviously, had his moments of glory with them, but played for like 4 other teams. But that's a pretty serviceable career for
Yeah.
him. It's notable.
Yep.
Yep. All right, Rob. So NCAA football is starting, right? The whole new alignment or whatever it is. I don't know if it's taking effect now, but here's the first game of the season. How about this to open up? Notre Dame, Ohio State, September 3rd. I think it's at Ohio State, but
Is that Labor Day?
huh?
Is that Labor Day or is that Labor Day? That's Sunday, right?
Yeah, it's around that time. I don't know. I mean, but that's a marquee game. And listen, right now, who's the defending champs? The Bulldogs. And you're going to have to knock them off first. But Ohio State looks really good. And like I said, every time I see highlights from last year, I see number 53, starting center, former St. Joe's standout Luke Whippler. CJ Stroud looking great. I mean, but listen, don't dismiss teams like Clemson. I don't know what Brian Kelly's going to be able to do at LSU. He's got some work to do. Not even sure who his quarterback is going to be, but he's an upgrade over Ed Orgeron, I think. But those are the marquee games, and I know we've talked about potentially going to a Notre Dame game this year, but we keep running out of space and time. But that's a must-see kickoff to the college football season.
Absolutely, can't wait.
And listen, we still never know where Notre Dame is going to end up. Logic says Big Ten, but you don't know. I wonder, because ultimately these super conferences that we talked about, they're going to be the teams, who win Super Conference A or Super Conference B. That's going to be the national championship game. And, that could leave Notre Dame on the outside looking in. But their independence shouldn't be a deterrent for them if they got that kind of a team in their national powerhouse, of course. Marcus Freeman's first season, and I hope he really pulls this one off, because
they got some tremendous recruiting classes, number one in the country.
And he's a former player, man. He knows what it's doing. And I think I was shocked by the Kelly move when it happened. I was shocked by the Freeman hire when it happened, but I think it was the right call. And I think he's done everything right so far. And I hope they have a great year under Marcus Freeman.
I watch almost every game I can.
Yeah.
If I'm out somewhere, I'll have it on the phone,
Yep.
Real quick, with college football, what drives me kind of nuts is that, now I know it's not a binding contract yet, but you see these players, high-profile players, giving commitments to a college, yet they're still getting recruited on the back end and taking visits to another school. That just drives me up a freaking wall when I see that.
Well, because we obviously know what drives that, right? That's why they verbally commit, so they have leverage against who's going to offer the better package. Unfortunately, we can't deny this. This is exactly what goes on, and it's as old as time, so it's never going to change. And especially now, though, a lot of kids are backing out of their deals and verbal commitments because they're getting a bigger nil package for whatever area, right? Like an Alabama kid, signing even Nick Saban says, I get it. I support these kids, but it's really turning the business back to ugly business, like the Marcus Dupree scenario we talked about a few weeks ago, right? So you just never know.
And supposedly they're gonna amend the rule that a player can only transfer once to unlimited.
Yeah, I don't know all the specifics now, but I do know now you could just basically transfer at will, and it's becoming unmanageable. It's becoming, look what Lincoln Riley's done at USC, right? I mean, the first thing he did was cherry pick his quarterback from Oklahoma to lead this rebuild for USC, and there's no consequences to it. So you like the flexibility for the athlete himself. You like the flexibility. He can make some money, instead of then pirating his image on a video game. I like that, but they got to tighten the rules a little bit. It's become too flexible. That's
Yep.
how I thought.
Yep.
So, Rob, before we move on to random points of interest, I have a picture of a future St. Joe's Green Knight. I was hoping you could put up.
Yep. Hold on.
This is absolutely sports related. So there he is. That is my grandson, Logan, who's 8.5 years old, and that's his uniform. And I mean, listen, I don't worry about concussions at this stage of his early career because those helmets, you could fall off the roof, and with that helmet, you'll be fine. But I'm so proud of him. He's so becoming into sports, and his favorite player is now Patrick Mahomes. So he can ultimately be, a guest host on the show, Rob. If you
Sure.
oversleep one night, someday we're gonna have to have him.
Sure.
Thanks for posting it. Thanks
You
for
got it.
posting it. Very proud of that young man, though. So, Rob, let's go. Our random points of interest, of course, is sponsored by Lynch Toyota of Manchester, Connecticut. And I think we have a shot in the number of the showroom. A couple of things on random points. You just talked about it a little bit before, that you just never know where, when injury or some unforeseen circumstance takes over. This guy, John Etchie, who was a great wide receiver at Alabama, right? Missing the entire season. He's got some type of leukemia or something, which they tend to think that they have made big strides in this area.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the unforeseen thing, that you never know what could happen. And we wish him the best, because he was a speed burner at Alabama. He was the #1 pick, but he's going to miss the year for the Titans.
Texans, right?
Texans. Yeah, I'm sorry. Anyway, so I have to bring this up because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but Darren Clark, and the reason I'm bringing this up, he won the senior British Open. So he's one of only three or four other guys that have won the regular British Open and the seniors British Open. And guys like Gary Player, Bob Charles, Tom Watson. Big accomplishment. And because you know why? I met Darren Clark when he was playing the U.S. Open out at Shinnecock Hills. He was out to dinner, and listen, he's notorious for enjoying the 19th hole, maybe to excess. But that's quite an accomplishment for a guy, and I wanted to note that. That's very much the sports vein, which we talk about. And I'm going to glance over this because remember last week, Rob, I mentioned Sergio Garcia wasn't feeling loved by the DP, which is the European Tour. So he had a change of heart this week. So he's not going to withdraw from the DPE, the DP European Tour, because he wants to play in the Ryder Cup. But his days are behind him. And it's so irrelevant news, I wanted to mention it. I'm sorry. One other thing. This is a strange thing. I don't understand what's going on. This, like, Brett Favre has gotten himself mixed up in some fraudulent welfare
Yeah,
fund.
so
There's like $90 million or something that is unaccounted for. And he's got his fingerprints all over this. I mean, his name is being thrown about. And you want to talk about flushing your legacy down
oh
the
my God,
drain, stealing from this was the money was designed, and this is in no way an indication of guilt or not guilt, but it's just an observation that you shouldn't even be mentioned in something like this. And he is. This was designed for welfare families and assistance in the state of Wisconsin or something. So I certainly hope it's not the case that he's involved in this, but
no,
just the mere mention, that there's a hint of impropriety here would be devastating to a Hall
absolutely,
of Fame career.
absolutely.
Oh my goodness, shocking. Um, anyway, so Rob, let's move on to a couple of notable passings, and I know this is um, there's a couple names on the list that really would resonate, let's say, in pop culture, right, if you will, in entertainment or acting. Wanted to start off with this. He played for Notre Dame. He was an offensive lineman for 4 years at Notre Dame. Paul Duncan. Had a mild career, but 35 years old. And just a typical Notre Dame football player, and had a cup of coffee, I think, with the Broncos, but he was young, 35 years old, out for a run, right? I mean, it could happen to anyone, anytime, but I
Yep.
wanted to give a shout out to the Notre Dame fans because we talked about them before, and Paul Duncan was a good player for them. Rob, I know this is one of your favorite movies. I think you've mentioned it before, Goodfellas, and actor Paul Sorvino, who we loved him in the role. I mean, right?
Oh yeah.
Paulie Cicero, of course, big time actor. And I wanted to give a shout out because I had almost a personal thing with him. I was playing golf at Spook Rock in Suffern, and me and my buddy got hooked up with a guy. And throughout the round, I kept telling my friend, I said, you know who he looks like? Paul Sorvino. And it turns out at the 18th hole, I said, I'm going to ask him anyway. It was his brother, Bill Sorvino.
Oh wow.
Isn't that
That's cool.
unbelievable?
Yeah, that's cool.
He was, I think he spent a lot of time in Bergen County, but what a great career. What an actor he was. And, when we see something like that, that's notable to sports with mono and mono, because we're outside of the batter's box sometimes. And,
I tell you, it's a bad year for mob actors. Right? It's been one after the other for a few weeks now.
Yeah. And believe it or not, Paul Sorvino had a role in The Firm. And I thought The Firm was a great movie.
I love The Firm. One of my favorites.
Right. But he had a small role. He was with the Moralto brothers.
He was yeah.
But the scene at the end and you talked about these mobsters, they were typecast in these roles all the time. But that was it was a small part, but it was a great movie, right? Wilford Brimley's in it and all that. Great movie.
I think I watched it over COVID like last year when we were, home, and I enjoy that movie every time.
Yeah, no doubt. So rest in peace and he was on Paul Sorvino was on Law and Order for first 2 years, maybe, I think, maybe even just 1 year, but he had a good role on that. He played Phil Soretti, I think, his character. So he was 83, Rob, 83. And one last notable passing, and it's absolutely, when I mentioned before, kind of pop culture. How about Wally Cleaver on Leave It to Beaver, Tony Dow? Was
that confirmed?
Yes.
I thought it came out a couple hours later that it wasn't, and
it did. It actually came out. He was 77, but he's been battling cancer for a long time. And they actually came out. And then the next day they said, Tony Dow didn't die, and then 2 hours later they said Tony Dow, in fact, passed away at 77.
Wow.
But I swear to God, I watched the show. I don't know how many. Have you ever watched Leave It to Beaver?
Not really.
We did. Steve and I did, and it, as dry and as almost silly as it was part of the culture at the time. It was excellent.
Yep.
Very funny. And we brought this up because one of his co-stars on that was oh God, tell me I can't remember his name. He played Eddie Haskell on the show, the wisecracking guy, but he was Wally's best friend. So anyway, Tony Dow, 77. Unbelievable. So Rob, I appreciate you jumping in.
No problem.
Like I said, we got some great comments from some folks last week. We got some new listeners, and good. I said, I'm looking forward to growing the show to the point we're going to start getting some guys. I bet this is a call out to Marty Fish. Marty, we want you on our show, and figure out a way to try to track them down. But we are expanding to a point that we love it. We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at sportswithmonoandmono@gmail.com. And Steve will be back with us next week. Rob, thanks for pitch hitting. Enjoy your weekend. Good. All right.
Very good.
Be good. See you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.